Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem. Got a great, very inspiring, fun show for you today with Dick Jackson, who started Aspen Expeditions and Aspen Paragliding many decades ago. He was one of the first, did the first tandem in Aspen, one of the first to start flying there, paragliders at least, and remained a true alpinist throughout his life. There's some fantastic stories of climbing in the Khumbu and lots of legendary names in this one. Robbie Whittle and Chuck Smith and Dave Brashears and Dave Bridges, Alex Lowe. And so lots of great stories and some of his amazing accomplishments and feats in the mountains. And we talk about when the mountains bite, and not necessarily from the flying side, but just, those of you that listen to the show know I just lost a very, very good friend in an avalanche. So we talk about some of that, what we go through when we go through these kind of things, and lots of learning there. This was quite a therapeutic talk for me. He's a very humble guy and quite understated, and just a lovely talk, which I think you'll love. Before we get to it, I just want to say I have this kind of thing at the end of every show about how you can support the show from the very beginning, and this is well over 10 years now. We have not relied on advertising. I can't stand that with podcasts when you have to sit through 10 minutes of buy this mattress or this thing. It just feels very inauthentic, and I think it's kind of what's wrong with digital media these days. Advertising and misinformation, disinformation, all these kind of things. So what I rely on to make this show go and pay for all the quite substantial costs behind the scenes, editing and housing and storage and just getting it out there, but also just rely on it as a way to make a living. So if you find the show valuable, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. It will always be free. There has been some confusion lately. People have said, hey, can I get an account? I don't know how to listen to these. You can listen to them on any platform, iTunes or Google Music or YouTube or you name it. We've got it everywhere. The show is free, and it will always be free. And that includes all of the bonus content. To get to that, you have to have a subscription. But if you can't afford to financially help us with the show, no problem, no questions asked. Just shoot me an email and I'll make a lifetime account for you. Maybe someday you can. But again, all we've asked for is $1 a show. You can support through the website, through Patreon. There's links all over the website to find out how to do this. So that's considerably less than a magazine subscription, way less than if you go out and have a cup of coffee a couple times a month. So if you can, I would really appreciate it. We would appreciate it here. And as always, you can comment on the work and who you'd like to get on the show. This one with Dick Jackson came from a recommendation, as most of them do these days. And I will keep doing these, what I'm calling the legend series. There are so many people who, we all stand on the shoulders of incredible people like Dick, who set the stage and were willing to fly these crazy gliders back in the day, and it's set it up for what we do now. And there's a lot of knowledge there, a lot of amazing stories there. So I'll keep doing it. He mentions a whole bunch of names in this one people I really need to get on the show. But you can also support it if you don't want to contribute financially in that way, just by if you want to grab one of our t-shirts or hats. I got some great stuff on the website. Swag wise, I'm also a dealer for Cortel and XC Tracer. Or you can buy the book, Advanced Paragliding. Give you something to read in the off days. But I appreciate it in whatever way you can, and it doesn't need to be financial. But thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing the stoke, and I hope you enjoy this show. Cheers. Dick, Welcome to the Cloud-Based Mayhem. I've been really excited to. I've been reading about you and stuff. I can't say that I'm fully prepared because you lived a fully incredible life. There's a lot we can talk about here, but I'm excited to chat with you. Really thankful for Belcourt reaching out and saying, "Hey, you got to talk to Dick Jackson.
Mhm.
He's been out there in Aspen since the beginning." Let's start at the beginning here. The audience, I know some of them know you, of course, but maybe a lot of the Europeans and stuff don't. But tell us, how did you get into alpinism and flying? I know you guys were using it really more as a descent tool back in the day, but how'd you get into this crazy sport, and what was the catalyst?
Well, early on, I did a really cool expedition to Denali, and we did the first American ascent of the Cassin Ridge on the south face. So after that trip, I got really excited about every part of mountaineering there is, but I hadn't been to the Alps yet. And so that the next season I went and I spent 3 years in a row climbing around, based in Chamonix, mostly Chamonix. And at that time, I would say that's probably 86, 87, right in there. And there was just sort of the beginning of paragliding going on in Chamonix. And I was way into trail running. If I wasn't climbing, I was running. And all I can say is that I would going up to the launch site at the Plan d'Aiguille or across the valley, and I'd just watch these launches, and it was really, just a question of, well, nobody was really soaring much. It was just a matter of how many flights you do in a day. And so I was intrigued by it because as an alpinist, I go, well, wow, what a great idea. Instead of dangerous descents and all the thousands of vertical coming down when you just kind of huck off and man, you're, you know, at the bar, so yeah. And so that was my start. I just watched a bunch of launches and landings, and then I go, I've got to do this. I've just, regardless of the thought of a soaring sport, wasn't even on the radar screen yet. That's how I got my start. I bought a 7-cell Harley for 100 francs or something, and I think I flew it once off Aspen Mountain and barely made it to the valley. So I think it had like one flight on it, and then it became a car cover or something. Who knows? Yeah,
So these were the original speed wings,
yeah,
7 cells and
yeah,
2-to-1 glide,
yeah,
and
yeah. So that's how I got into it, and then as I came back to Aspen, I was all jazzed about it, and I would do anything. And it kind of overlapped with the time when John Bouchard was kind of doing a circuit around the West, mostly in the West, and getting his climbing buddies or anyone that was climbing at all. And that was predominantly who it was early on, to get turned on to paragliding and again, more of a descent tool than it was anything else at that time. Yeah. So,
so this is Bibler and Bouchard,
yeah.
and you guys were all. And then what was the gear? What were you already really attacking kind of mountains in an alpine style? Lightweight,
Well,
minimalist.
the lightweight thing was kind of a given in time because the early on, the square nines and all, aside from the heavy material, there wasn't much to the glider, so and you could pack things pretty small. But I have to say the performance was so bad that you didn't really get too excited about using it as a descent tool until the gliders got a little bit better. And
Hmm.
and then as time went on, obviously Bouchard was pushing that, and I think his initial gliders were copies of some ITV stuff, square nine type things, and very tricky to launch because they were just so worthless. But once you got it in the air, it actually, I think 4-to-1 glide and seemed like it was pretty good. Yeah, yeah.
That's so funny. Cool story. There, you just before we started recording, you were talking about doing the first tandem off Aspen, with who was it you were with, and then you had to run
Yeah, it was
halfway down the mountain or something.
one of my best friends, Chris Blotchley, and we were some of the first to fly, among a couple other people, off Aspen Mountain. But we did the first tandem, and it was with a glider that I had picked up the next season. I went down to Annecy and went to the ITV factory, and they sold me this tandem glider that was like brand new, a new design. It was called a Titan, and I've got some photos of it that are just ridiculous. But we did fly, And Chris would vouch for this, that we both remember running about a third of the way down Walsh's. And if anyone's flown off Walsh's, it's like a steep ski run, and it goes down a few hundred meters or so. And so we probably ran halfway down that thing, or a third of the way down, before we got off the ground. And it finally worked out. We survived it.
I take it a lot of the flights back then were probably just survival. Just you're stoked if you live.
Yeah, we were self-taught, but we didn't have a clue at first what we were doing. It just seemed like, okay, well, these were essentially two riser, maybe three riser rigs at the time, and we just did what we could, and taught each other a little bit. I mean, we were conscious of mountain weather. I mean, we lived in that. We live in Aspen, so it's at 8,000 feet, and the launch sites are close to 11,000 feet, so it's high up. But again, without a perspective on density altitude, it is what it is. I mean, your speeds are what they are based on altitude, but just the name of the game at first. So that's kind of what we did. We were mostly self-taught, and it predominantly was alpine climbers, and as we started to fly more, it just attracted more and more people, just whatever their background was, and all locals. I mean, the tourists weren't really dialed into it at all yet. So yeah.
Had you done any hang gliding at this point, or did you step directly into paragliding?
No, I have never done any hang gliding, and my only first exposure to it was when we went to Denali, McKinley, for the first time in 1976. Some guys had just flown off Denali and landed at the airstrip, so we were right there. I've got photos of these guys flying and landing, and so that might have been my first time actually seeing a hang glider up close. And that was pretty interesting itself. Yeah.
They carried hang gliders to the top of
Oh, it
Denali?
was a major thing. I think they had friends that helped out because, and especially in those days, those guys were, they were 60, 70, 80 pounds, so I think it took them something like 30 days to get the gliders all the way to
Oh my
the top of Denali.
god, I never knew hadn't heard this one.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good
And that was in
podcast.
76. Yeah, that was in 76. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So, did your focus in the kind of mid late 60s, or sorry, 80s, when you were climbing all that, did it stay? If you stay, I mean, I know you've had Aspen expeditions since, but you've been doing mountaineering trips for decades. Did that stay your focus, or did it really switch to flying?
It was both. It was
Okay.
kind of fun for me personally because I became a internationally certified mountain guide, and I was president of the Guides Association here in the States for about 5 years. And so in those formative years, I was without a doubt the only internationally certified mountain guide that was also a advanced tandem and P4 pilot. So I sort of had this personal pride, without even hardly talking about it, that I was in a pretty unique position, and my time was pretty much split. Probably more flying in those first years than guiding, although on a given day, I was doing either one. And it took a little while for the paragliding business to really kick in, and something that we could definitely chat about the early days, because we were flying off Aspen Mountain, and we had a very good relationship with the Aspen Skiing Company, and we knew all the top management people and blah blah blah. And so they didn't much care what we did. Just we went off the front side, especially even in the wintertime, launched. And there was just a handful of us doing this anyway. And then we'd land right in town in Wagner Park. And that started to attract more attention because we were very visible at that point.
That's amazing. And so the are you guys in the same insurance problem that all the lift access? Is it still lift access flying in Aspen now?
Yeah, well, it's a drive-up site in the summertime, but in the
Okay.
wintertime, there's a lot less flying in the winter, but still, there's a lot of people do it. And we fly off, both Snowmass and Aspen Mountain. in the early days, it was just the relationship that we had with the skiing company, and they seemed to have a lot of confidence what we were doing, you know. So it kind of added to the attraction of, you know, uniqueness of Aspen as a ski area,
Sure.
and then as time went on, some issues came up, and we had to tweak things and all, which is good because Aspen Mountain, the one thing that really made it work so well is the topography there, because Aspen Mountain is basically a ridge line. So we fly, you know, mornings to the east off Walsh's, and then in Ruthie's in the afternoons facing west. So it works out perfectly for, even though we didn't have a clue what we were doing at first, it was very accommodating, put it that way. Yeah. So,
And when did you start Aspen paragliding? And why did you start it? There was just enough, you felt like there was enough interest?
well,
And was it just tandems in the beginning, or was it
no, it
teaching, or what
was,
were you
you know,
doing?
it was not so much tandems yet because we've had to kind of figure some things out. But I was on a flight to Reno for a trade show, and I sat next to a guy that became my partner for a while, Jan Stensvold, and so we didn't even know each other, but in the short time we got to talk a bit, we were both excited about creating a business out of it. And of course, we barely hit on that because, you know, we were both excited about paragliding. And I don't think he had done it yet, but it was just this ability to get in on the ground floor. You know, I think that's when, you know, probably about the same time that Belcourt and some of these Utah guys were responding to Bouchard, because he was the one man show that was running around getting climbing friends. Somewhere I have a photo of like Michael Kennedy, who was a big name and still is, but he ran Climbing Magazine at the time. And I just have a photo of him. I think there was something like 3 inches of snow on the base of the mountain. So I have a picture of him, and I don't even know if he had a helmet on. He was like stuffed his head straight into the ground. And anyway, so we all sort of survived those early years. You know, it was very fond memories. I have to say, it was a lot of fun, even though we didn't really have a clue what we were doing. Yeah,
Everybody talks about, the folks that I've had on the show and then just met randomly over the years that were part of that scene back then. Everybody talks about just the community and what was going on, and the excitement for and not long after where you're talking about that, you started flying distance and going
yeah,
up instead of
yeah,
just down.
yeah. Yeah, but the first big long flights, I mean, it was very unusual, but you know, Chuck Smith and a couple other people, they flew to Crested Butte. And so when thing started happening, it was just like, wow, you know, over several years, it was obvious that this is becoming a very technical and soaring sport. And, you know, we've always shared the launch sites, especially Ruthie's, because it was rare that you saw a hang glider come off of the Walsh's side, but we were sharing the site with those guys. And it didn't take long for the paragliding community to far outnumber the few hang glider pilots that were still doing it. And so it was a pretty cool scene. It was, the camaraderie was there. It attracted some really good locals into the sport. And ironically, there was very few accidents in those first couple of years. You know, things started happening a bit more after that, with, you know, people getting a bit more aggressive, and visiting pilots coming, and, you know, all the factors with high altitude flying and all that.
And tell me about, were you part of helping creating the first comps there and that kind of thing? Because I mean, Aspen used to be a place that was legendary, as Telluride was, for competitions, and Telluride for hang gliding as well. But
Yeah.
when did all were you part of that whole thing too?
Oh
And
yeah.
were you flying competitions? Were you really into
I
that?
was never really a comp pilot, although we hosted the nationals in both 93 and 94. And when that happened, it was such a eye opener, because you had all the Europeans coming on over, you know, and you know, just like with mostly ski racing, things like that, you know, they were state of the art. They were, you know, definitely ahead of Americans when it came to those initial comps. And some of the names back then, you know, it was like Robbie Whittle and Klaus Schwager, Urs Harry, Sandy Kochepan, Claire Bernier. Those were some of the as, pilots. And of course, as time went on, of course, Dave Bridges, it was so sad when Dave, died on Shishapangma with Alex Lowe, but Chuck Smith, Mark Axon, John Bouchard, Ed Pittman, Mitch McAleer, Bob Englund, Bob Schick, Scott Amy. So these are all the names in those first few years that were representing comp flying. And so it
Mm.
was great to host the whole thing, but I have to say I've always taken pride in being a good tandem pilot, kind of like a UPS driver. So and and so I was never really my time was split between guiding, mountain guiding, and traveling, paragliding. So I never became much of a comp pilot. Yeah.
Tell me about Dave. You guys ran Aspen Paragliding together, right? Didn't he buy into it at some point,
Yeah.
or you guys were co-owners? Tell me about Dave. I just
Oh,
such
Dave
a
was just the
beast.
most impressive person. He was world class in anything Dave did. And he was just such a pleasure to be around and so fit. So we did quite a few things together in the mountains. And yet, when he moved to Aspen, he wasn't much of a skier yet. So we spent a lot of time in the high mountains around here, because almost all my skiing and my business was backcountry skiing. It wasn't really the front side. And so Dave became extremely close friends. And when he went off to climb some big peaks, like for instance, he climbed Makalu, which is the fifth highest peak in the world. The video that they shot because it was a sponsored trip. Here he is at over 28,000 feet, and he's feeling good. Like uh, um, Dave was just he's kind of a mutant in a way because he was just so fit and so yet so easy to be around. No ego. Yeah, didn't exist. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. So
Wow.
it was always great to spend time with Dave. And then when he died on um, a big slide triggered and had nothing to do with them. They were just the wrong place at the wrong time, and him and Alex Lowe were killed, and Conrad Anker survived it. So Dave was great. On my desk, I still have some photos of us together, and he was one of the most impressive people I've ever met. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I hadn't planned on talking about this at all, but I lost a very, very dear friend in an avalanche here just a couple weeks ago. He was my main backcountry ski partner. He was the main ER doc here in our little town, and responsible for getting the town through COVID. Just amazing guys. Climbed Denali, climbed
Yeah,
Everest. It's kind of a younger version of Dave Bridges,
yeah,
just a total
yeah,
beast. He wasn't not a pilot,
yeah,
but
yeah,
you have any words of wisdom for uh, dealing with that kind of loss? I mean, it's not uncommon in our sport, of course, but
yeah,
you went through it with Dave. Is it just time? Is it, yeah, obviously this is very fresh
yeah.
for me. I'm
Right.
going to be, running his memorial here in a couple weeks, and just,
Well, a
it's
lot of it
brutal.
is time. Time is a healing factor, but only if you actively participate with it. And a lot of time to yourself, to photographs, uh, can bring back some memories that are not as vivid. I think it's an important part of our maturity because these things happen with our lifestyle the way they are.
Mm,
We tend to be somewhat Buddhist in our feelings and our lifestyle here. Especially since our daughter's a Sherpa and being
mm,
over in Nepal quite a bit. But it does take time, but it's not passive. You really have to get into your own head. And any other mutual friends, it's very, very important to spend time together and voice feelings. Some people we're all different how we express things and deal with grief. But there's a formula, and that's all part of it, to move through the stages of grief into an acceptance, and you come out shining, but not without the permanent loss. It's there. So
mm,
it's part of personal growth, and the whole Buddhist mantra, and among other things, is impermanence. We're all here for a little blip of time. So yeah,
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 yeah. Well, that's helpful. Thank you.
yeah.
Were you part of the rescue operation? I know Bill went over there when they to get Alex and Dave out. Were you part of that whole
No,
process?
no, I wasn't. Um, there was, I got a phone call about it. It was a sponsored trip, and actually, ironically, it's the same fellow, John Wilcox, who is hosting this puja for tomorrow
For
for
Brashears?
Dave Brashears, and at the
Uh,
time, the trip was run as a filming adventure, and so Dave, because he performed so well and shot some great footage on Makalu, he was there more as a high altitude cameraman, the same way that Dave Brashears became so well known, especially in '96, when he shot the IMAX footage of Everest. Um, so there's a lot of history toward um, expeditions and filming, sponsorship, and of course the dark side, which does happen. So yeah.
Tell me some stories from back in the day in Aspen paragliding. Some of the things, we had Josh Cohn on back many years
Yeah.
ago, and he talked about one of the funniest things he'd ever seen was flying in a well, funny slash terrifying flying in a gust front in Aspen. I think with Robbie below him or something. But it must have been wild to yeah, I run competitions now out in Utah in Monroe. And the thought of running a comp in Aspen or Telluride where you're just higher and you're more, in a sense, surrounded by bigness,
Yeah. Yeah.
less places to run. That must have been pretty wild time.
It was because this thing kind of surprised us. Even it didn't have all the classic. This was a gust front, and we always, newer pilots now they don't have any recollection. But we, for the longest time, we just called it the Friday Night Rodeo because county sheriffs and everything they're gliders all over the county. This big gust front came through, and ironically, I don't think anybody got hurt. A couple people went down under reserve, but it was wild. Just like a lot of things. Like years ago, I shot some photos of a big avalanche in Chamonix, and then I got a hold of like Life magazine or Perry Mash, and it's like, well, you have photos of an avalanche in Chamonix. It's just like, duh. So it's anyway that we all survived that one, but and when it comes to some favorite stories, for instance, Aspen is still a sister city with Chamonix, France. And in the early days of that organization, I we hosted this delegation from Chamonix here in Aspen, and I sat next to Maurice Herzog, who led the first expedition to Annapurna in 1950, and his visa number for Nepal is 00001. Anyway, and I,
Wow.
I never thought I'd ever meet him. And so, long story short, I sat next to him, asked him if he'd like to go paragliding, and at the time he goes, "I would love to." Although he qualified and said he's not allowed to do it in Chamonix because at the time he had just been mayor of Chamonix, but he was one of just a couple surviving members from the original Annapurna expedition, so they were guarding him. Silly things like paragliding. Well, anyway, I did take him, and Dave Bridges and Chuck Smith, because he must have told me like 60 times he can't run because he froze his feet off and all that. And so, we had a plan and it worked out. Fortunately, Dave and Chuck ran him off, Ruthie's, and said, don't ever let him touch the ground unless, we're flying, whatever. And then I had a good friend, Pine, who was a rugby player. And I said, look, I'm going to spot land. He is not to touch the ground. And, of course, it worked out.
You told him to just catch him like a
Yeah,
football?
but yeah, like a baby, holding him. But it was ironic because, at that point over the years, he became a really big guy, well over 200 pounds. And, so, but it worked out, but I have to say, I stayed in touch with him for a while and he would write me these letters in those days saying to my hero. And I'm going like, I don't get it, man. You're my hero. Uh, so that's one
Oh man,
story.
you made his day.
Yeah.
That's incredible. What happened to his feet? Just frostbite?
Well,
He lose
yeah,
them
in
both?
the original 1950 expedition, when the French climbed Annapurna, there's a classic book out that he wrote, but he froze his feet off and his hands and this and that. He still just had a couple fingers left, and anytime he'd write
Jeez.
anything, it would just be like scrolling up. But just a wonderful man, and it was a pleasure to not only meet him, but to share something like special like that. You know, it was good. You know, it's really good.
Tell me another climbing story. That was a good one.
All right. Let's see. What do we got here? I've wrote a few notes down.
Maybe a Dave one. Did you guys must have done a ton of climbing
Yeah, we
together.
did.
Ever get in an gnarly pinch?
Yeah, we definitely did a bunch of climbing together, but we spent a lot of times. Dave was kind of new to skiing when he moved to Aspen, so we kind of held his hand a little bit, and being such a great athlete, he became a pretty good skier in a pretty short period of time. And of course, all the initial skiing was purely backcountry, so it's a little bit higher um learning curve when you're learning to ski, and it's almost always tricky, changeable conditions in the backcountry versus the front side. But unfortunately, Dave wasn't around all that long before he started to travel, and then unfortunately died died in that big avalanche. And
Mm.
so, I forget exactly how old Dave was, but he wasn't very old when he finally passed. It's all about quality, because there's no uh, there's no guarantees these days, So yeah.
Yeah, there
But
certainly
another
isn't.
story, we used to run trips to international trips quite a bit. So we had a group that went over and went paragliding in Ecuador, and we flew some sites that were new sites and everything. But we ended up taking the group up Cotopaxi, which is almost 20,000 feet, and two of us flew off, which was really great fun. And it kind of highlighted the whole thing that I was into as a descent tool. And even to the point where being over in Europe and Chamonix a lot, I ran into the guys that ran the company Nervura. I don't know if you ever heard of that company. It was from the south of
Yeah,
France.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they were the first to make ultralight gear. And so I actually imported some of their gear myself and hardly sold any of it. But they had a little solo glider that was, something like 2.5 kilos total. So that was kind of fun to be at the ground floor of ultralight gear, and then of course Thin Red Line, and like the big trip we did that Chuck was on, where we went to Nepal and we flew quite a bit, and it's a video that a lot of people might not have seen, but it's called Over Kumbu, Between Earth and Sky. So we ended up filming that. It was sponsored by Marmot because that was our big sponsor at the time, and we made a pretty darn good film out of it. I don't know if you've seen that, but you could probably pull it up somewhere. It's called Over Kumbu, Between Earth and Sky, and it was one of the best adventure trips you could ever have because we just had such a good time, and we had sort of the classic A team, and it was great fun. And Chuck, Dale Covington, Sherry Silvera. So there were a handful of us and our goal was to fly off of a unclimbed peak in the Khumbu. It was around 23,000 feet, and so we actually didn't fly off that, but we ended up doing some pretty amazing flying. It was good fun. Yeah, yeah,
I had Pierre Carter on recently who flew off of Everest, and his story about just the thinness of the air was fascinating. I mean, we all know this, but it's very different when you go to do it. He said when he took off, I can't remember. It wasn't a full size glider. It was a kind of a mini wing,
yeah,
but it was just honking.
yeah,
And he thought, man, this is really at the extreme end of the wind that I can manage, especially being this high. But then he brought up his wing, and it was like flying in, a very mellow wind on the coast. Yeah,
yeah,
he said he barely had enough wind to take
yeah,
off,
yeah,
because you can't run, at 28,000 some odd feet, 29,000 feet. It's pretty hard to run.
yeah,
And so,
yeah.
but yeah, you actually need a lot of wind.
Yeah, you do, and of course the wind direction and changing, flying from a high altitude, especially a technical summit, is quite tricky, of course, and you can easily have too much wind or just kind of changing direction and just all that kind of stuff. So anytime you go up a major summit, you're likely to be prepared to walk down because it's the odds are stacked against you as far as flyable conditions. But you never know. I mean, if you do your homework and you have a predictable weather pattern, that's kind of where my whole head was at for a lot of years. Is using lightweight gear and flying and not necessarily just as a descent tool, but certainly launching from way high up. And there's a lot of peaks in the elk range here and around Aspen that we've flown off of. In fact, one of my favorite things that I've done, I used to really enjoy guiding people like up peaks. Most people wouldn't know, but there's a peak here that's almost 14,000 feet called Mount Grizzly or Grizzly Peak, and it's got a west face that is perfect for flying because it's a big scree slope, and the thermals just kind of come up from the west once the sun's high enough, and so I used to really enjoy bringing a lightweight tandem glider and hardly even telling the client, that this is what our plan is, because we're you crampons, ice axe, it's a snow climb, and you get to the top, and it's just, well, let's put this stuff away, and it's like, well, boy, as opposed to thousands of vertical going down, it's just like you get all set and you do your prep and fly off and land about, I don't know, 5 or 10 meters from the car. So it makes it it
It's all very civilized, isn't it, when
it's
it works
all
right?
very civilized, and it's just so much fun to combine mountaineering and paragliding. And to me, that's always been my true passion. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You've probably seen some of the films coming out recently of the guys that are using their paragliders. They're going up into Pakistan and using their and there is this is happening all over the place now. But the films that I'd seen originally, when kind of the first moves were happening out in Pakistan, where they're taking off down low in the valleys and putting on their skis in the air and then thermaling up, and which then makes it much nicer to
Sure.
land. You're way up high now, and you can just slide in on your skis,
Yeah.
put your stuff away in, and
Yeah.
ski down until you can't ski anymore, and
Right.
fly back down to the car
Right. Yeah.
or the hotel or
Yeah.
wherever you're staying.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can cover a lot of
Uh-huh.
ground.
Uh-huh.
So you're not only using the descent tool now, but an ascent tool and a descent tool. It's
Yeah.
pretty amazing.
Yeah. It makes perfect sense. I mean, when you combine lightweight gear and good experience and being a technical climber and all that. And then ideally, I mean, these days now everything's about what you do once you're in the air. It's not just a descent tool. It's like just amazing. Chris told me the other day that someone launched from near Fruta, which is not far from Grand Junction, way on the western
Yeah.
slope here in Colorado, and flew over the divide and landed in Boulder.
Yeah.
And like, wow. I mean, but the stuff that's being done, I don't need to tell you. I mean, you could tell me more than I even have any idea about is what is being done these days. It's just, yeah, yeah, it's
That was an amazing day. Yeah, one of our pilots landed in Winter Park, another one landed in Avon, and then, like you said, the guy named Jared Sheed, who's, I may have this wrong. He's done a couple of my hike and fly events, but he was at the Wide Open last year, and that was his first goal. I think he's only been flying 4 or 5 years,
okay.
and he flew, like you said, from Grand Junction. Those of you listening who don't know this terrain, so he flew from the western side of the Colorado Rockies, out in the desert, the high desert,
Yeah,
up and over the spine of the Rockies,
yeah,
which is just peppered with 14,000 foot peaks. So this is big terrain, and all the way to the east side, where
yeah,
those of you know, in Denver and Boulder, and yeah, and landed northeast actually of
uh,
Boulder. And it was
yeah,
a 340K flight or
yeah,
something.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was
yeah,
massive,
yeah.
incredible.
Yeah, and wow, when Chris told me that, it's like I don't know the guy or anything, but man, that is some serious flying. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the gliders are helping us do amazing
Yeah,
things.
yeah, and I
It's
wouldn't have a clue,
really,
but I mean, you could tell me on and on about, the newest, greatest, two-line gliders and boy, it's so I've been out of touch with things for quite some time, so I just love to hear the stories in the same way that we're talking about this, that just kind of blow me away with literally what is going on these days. Yeah.
So this Friday, what'd you call it? The Friday night rodeo? Was that, that was at one of these nationals?
No,
That was
no,
the one that
no,
you
that was an evening of
that was just
flying, and
normal Friday night?
we had a bunch of visiting pilots around. It was I don't know, mid-season, and it was just like, where everybody was really excited about flying, and, my recollection is that it didn't seem to have all the ingredients that would, get you worried or concerned. It wasn't like there was a big, CUMI out there that was unloading, but this gust front, happened, and, again, other people might know more details than I do, but all I know is that there was one lady that was flying, and she goes, "Hey, come over here. There's really good lift." And it's like, well, you could not avoid going up way faster and out of control than you wanted to. Um, and people, like I said, they just landed if they could even land. It was really serious. And I have to say it's just so fortunate that nobody was even hurt. When you consider what the potential was for that one. Blowing all over the place. Just and that was kind of a wake-up call. It's like, maybe we ought to pay a little more attention here. Ed Pittman was flying, and, gosh, let's see, I'm not really sure who was in town at that point. Yeah, it was something else, and there's no question that anyone that flew, and if they're still around, if they're, whatever they're wherever they are, you'd never forget that night, so, yeah. So, yeah.
Is Aspen paragliding still a going concern, and Aspen expeditions? Are you still guiding? You still,
No, I sold both
um
businesses there, but they were separate businesses. I sold the Aspen Expeditions to two of my guides back
okay.
in, I think, 2017. And then Alex Palmas, he ended up buying the paragliding business, and he still runs it. And things are good. Everything's been changed with insurance and access and all that. Fortunately, the relationship with the skiing company is still really good. So they're flying the same sites. The ski company is self-insured, and so as opposed, and because they're flying off Aspen Mountain predominantly, or Snowmass, but it's under the Aspen Skiing Company, they're not going through the same headaches and challenges
Mm,
that so many flying sites. And, of course, every time I talk to Chuck, it's a
yeah,
variation
like
on the
they are
same thing.
here.
It's been really rough, and so without knowing the details of what people are going through, the scene here in Aspen is still pretty good.
That's
Yeah.
great. You mentioned you adopted a little Sherpa girl who's now grown. She's in her early 20s. Is she a pilot? Does she fly? She
No, but I
pick
used to
up the
take
bug
her when
from
she
you?
was just little. I think her first flights, I've got photos where I think she was around, 3.5 or 4 years old, something like that. And of course, she doesn't
Wow.
remember that. When she was really little, I didn't even need a tandem glider, because it was, just adding a little more weight to me, and yeah. So she's grown up in the mountains, and she used to ski race, and she's a really good skier. As she got a little older, she went to Colorado, not Rocky Mountain School down in Carbondale, and now she's at UW. So she went from a graduating class of 43 to a freshman class of like 8,000. UW's a pretty big school, but she's loving
Yeah.
it, and she flies home for the summer tomorrow. So it's just gonna be great to have her around again. Yeah.
Oh, that'll be sweet.
Yeah.
Tell me about this. Tell me about the thing for Brashears tomorrow. You said it's a Buddhist ceremony. What's that look like?
Well, there's going to be a High Lama there that I don't know how it's been arranged. I don't know many details, but when there's an important need for closure, there's everybody deals with it in their own personal way, but to have an acknowledgement in a community, especially friends and those who have shared the same lifestyle or similar climbs, and an awful lot of people knew Dave, either just by knowing him or done trips with him. And of course, his reputation was as sensational as anybody else you ever know of or meet. And so there's a closure. It's a puja. Puja is a Buddhist ceremony that is about chanting and prayer, and it's a way that even though it's a couple easily a couple months after Dave passed, it's the appropriate way to acknowledge the passing from one life form to another, depending upon what you believe in, you know. And the Lama Geshe, he ended up dying in 2018, but he was the highest Lama, Buddhist Lama or priest in the Upper Khumbu Valley, and he lived in the same small village that my daughter was born in. He actually gave her her name. We had the pleasure of meeting him and being close with him on a couple trips. And so this whole process is something that is very soothing, and it'll be really, and if anything else, it's just a wonderful time to see old friends and to be there for each other, and read stories just not unlike some of these of about Dave and what was going on with him, because quite frankly I knew Dave a bit, but not more in recent years, so I wouldn't be the one that knew too much about his more recent
Mm.
years before he
Yeah,
passed.
legendary guy.
Yeah.
Amazing. Uh, I'd love to hear a couple more stories just about maybe. Do you have a flight that still you still think about when you're in bed sometimes at night, going, "Oh man, that one."
Yeah. Well, I might have to say that the culmination of my career in the mountains, was around this trip we did in 2003, and ironically, that's the same time frame when my daughter was born, about 15 kilometers or so from where we were flying in Nepal. That trip with Chuck and Dale and all and Sherry, where the over Khumbu between Earth and Sky trip. That was a very strong remembrance, and it was a fantastic trip for one thing, but it also meant so much to me because it pulled together all my attraction and passion in one trip, in one film, in one series of stories. And so it worked out so well, and even the movie that was made, the video, nothing was contrived. Everything that is recorded was done in the same order and the same style that it was presented in the final version, as opposed to some of the stuff where the editor's license could kind of tweak things in a way that you're going like, that's not really how it happened,
Mm.
and it was great. And so that probably means the most to me. There's so many little mini trips where you fly off or hike, climb, fly, and so there's all sorts of stories out there. But that's probably the number one and it was a long trip. It was about a month long. It had all the ingredients of mystique. We got over there and we thought we had permission to fly in the Khumbu. It's all national park. It's called Sagamartha National Park up there. And it'd be like if you were going to the Tetons and going, well, we've got permission from the Park Service to fly off the Grand Teton or something like that. It's like, well, that's
Mm.
okay, but you don't necessarily have permission from the FAA. So we had to go through um, the process of it wasn't possible to simply beg for forgiveness as opposed to permission, because we were flying over Namche Bazaar, which is the main village in the Khumbu, and at the time the Maoist activity in the mountains was really ramping up, and it was all these let's just say challenges that would be a bit daunting, but we pulled it off and we got permission to fly. And we took a bunch of locals, tandem, and some of it was just hilarious because the Sherpanis, they have a traditional dress that they always wear. So Dell was great to um, make the statements like, well, how do you figure out the configuration to put a paragliding harness on, this, Sherpani with a long dress on, and then of course praying and prayer beads, and some of these, like we flew this one wife of a very good friend of ours, and she was having her beads and praying the entire flight because, but she had a good time, but and of course we filmed it, and at any one time we had as many as 5 cameras on board, I don't need to tell you about the kind of stuff, where especially back before GoPro and all, where like you're flying with the smallest video cameras you can, and you're going, "Wow, this is the money shot." This was a great flight, and you realize that after you launched, the wire connecting it to
Oh,
it disconnected. So
oh,
not only
so
wasn't it the
brutal.
money flight, but you got
You didn't get
zero
anything.
footage out of it. And so it took quite an effort to make the whole thing happen. There were seven of us on the trip, and at any one time, we were all making it happen. And we flew from pretty high up. We flew from a peak that we called the Lusa Peak, and it was around 20,000 feet, so we were pretty high up. And yet the location was exquisite because, we're right there in the shadows of Mount Everest and the highest peaks in the world, right there. And then the spin-off to the whole thing was that because we cut the trip short and didn't fly off the peak that we were hoping to, we had some extra time in our plans. So we created what we called the Kumbu flight paragliding school, and a lot of the locals that we dealt with, we were just doing our due diligence, on level ground and doing the ground handling and all that. But it completed the whole picture, where in the aftermath, it's like, well, you're often closer to meditation and to nirvana, whatever you want to believe in. It's more so when you're stooping than when you're soaring. So like, sort of
Mm,
the mantra of like, well, you certainly don't have to soar to reach
to reach.
the same height, so yeah, yeah. So that was a great trip, and to me, I think all of us on the trip, we were just like so blown away that it worked out like it did, and it still means a lot, even though it was back in 2003. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
How has the time you've spent in the mountains and also with the maybe with the people of Nepal and the Sherpas and that culture, how has that transformed you as a how has that affected you as a person, or how does when you look back, what how has that made you kind of see the world through a different lens?
Boy, what a fantastic question. I have to say, it's totally changed my life. I started climbing over there and doing trips quite a long time ago, and so I immediately had this attraction for the obvious things with Buddhism, prayer flags, this and that, and that you're around. But as I spent more time there, especially in more recent trips, and being so close now with our daughter from being from there, that it's everything. I'm 74 now, and I feel pretty good. The mantra of impermanence and this and that, it makes a lot of sense to me. I'm over the hill, but well, let's just say I'm still going up the hill, but I'm not so sure when I'm going to be topping out and truly over the hill. It means everything to me, and our home, our relationships, my wife, my daughter, we're all totally on the same page. And there's even in Seattle, where my daughter goes to school, there's quite a large Sherpa community up there. We like to hopefully indulge in the camaraderie and the companionship that we have up there as well. It's very remarkable, and I think a lot about it, even when I'm not thinking about it. It's becomes part of us. Yeah. Yeah.
What do you find more scary, the climbing or flying?
Um, Neither one. I think a lot of times fear kicks in after the fact, when you have a close call or something like that. And, if you add up all those close calls, you wonder how you ever got to this point. But no, the fear's never really been overwhelming to me.
Neither one.
Even in the
Yeah.
earliest days of paragliding, where it's like I launched off the Grita Midi in Chamonix with my Square 9, and I don't know what I would have done up there on my own, but there were two pilots that were like quote unquote factory pilots for North Sail, and at the time they were making some paragliders, and everything was pretty bogus at the time. But I got up there and they could tell, like, well, this guy's. They looked at my gear. I had this pink and white Square 9 from Bouchard, and they went, well, we probably ought to give this guy a little help. um, you know, and but even then, if you blew a launch there, I mean, it was 2,000 feet straight down, you're going to dive, right?
Yeah.
But I've never actually been overwhelmed by the fear factor. I've appreciated that, after the fact sometimes. I've been far more scared doing other things than climbing or than I would say backcountry skiing at times where you go on first as a guide and you do your homework and you train your clients well enough so that if there is a slide, then hopefully they can be responsible. But the guide's always gone first, and therefore your level of confidence and communication and all the due diligence is something that is what guiding's all about. And yet there's the dark side. We lost two really good friends this year while they were guiding. You could always be critical because, accidents sometimes happen when you make a mistake. Your lack of judgment is, or lapse of judgment is unforgiving. And yet, in the moment, I have to say, my level of confidence has been appropriate, not inflated, but certainly it's the real world out there. Yeah, yeah. I get far more scared when I think of traffic or front range type city urban stuff. No, when it comes to the mountains and everything we do, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I'd love to hear maybe the craziest thing you remember seeing or were a part of, either flying or climbing. I don't care which one. Either one.
Yeah. Well, boy, the craziest type stuff. You know, probably more in the climbing realm because I've been around that so much on big trips in the big mountains and all. And when it comes to like crazy type stuff, when I think about what has been done in the Himalayas now, because as opposed to the early days when everything was done in sort of expedition style, siege style, you fixed ropes and multiple camps and taking your time. And, it didn't take too much after that when alpine climbing, in places like the Aspen area or the Alps, and then you translate that to the Himalayas or the Andes or the big mountains, Bhutan, whatever. Then to utilize that same style where it is really unforgiving. You are heading up something and it's not real clear how the heck you'd have to get off the thing if you didn't summit. It was committed. And without really a specific example, that's what's been going on. And it's been going on for quite some time. And when you start to think about the big peaks, the 14 peaks that are over 8,000 meters, they're just numbers because there's times you could be on something that's, 7,000 meters. I mean, it doesn't have to be 8,000 that to make it, sensational. But the style that is going on is really you could say crazy, but it's all a matter of perspective. Yeah, I I'd be
Mm.
hard pressed to say someone else is doing something crazy, and only after the fact you might say, well, they screwed up or they had bad luck or whatever. There's all the one-liners that are out there.
Mm.
Yeah. When, like for instance, I don't know, this doesn't apply to climbing so much, but Mark Twain had one point saying that the only thing, one really good thing about getting old is that it just doesn't last that long. Yeah. And so how, if we have this, luck and luxury of actually getting to be older, whatever that is, well, then maybe we've just been fortunate for a bunch of times.
My buddy and neighbor Nate Scales, who's been a
Yeah.
mentor for me, his saying is better lucky than good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think for any of us to reach, the age that we have, given what we've done,
Yeah.
you've got to be lucky. You got to be lucky.
Yeah. 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 you just don't turn down the good luck because it's, in one moment it's there and another moment it isn't. This friend who did die guiding, it's probably about a month and a half ago now. He was in Canada. He was an American guide, but I won't mention names. It's not fair to do that right now. But he stepped off the track to take a pee, and just not necessarily something that's on the podcast or anything, but it's just an example where pretty benign, and
Yeah.
for whatever reasons, they're on a glacier and they weren't roped up, and it's the first thing that could be a critique is like, why in the world weren't they roped up? But that would be always the case when things go south that quickly. Well, he stepped off the track and disappeared into a crevasse and died. Um,
Jeez.
um,
Yeah.
and just like that. And that's pretty much how a lot of accidents happen. You kind of let your guard down, but you're not even thinking that you are. It's just
Yeah.
it's like things happen, and it
Things happen.
could be a car accident. It could be so many ways that you get it besides, the big C. If someone's healthy and they're staying healthy into their older age, number of years, what didn't get them?
That's been an interesting thing. I've been kind of thinking about a lot since my friend died in the avalanche. Is when you have there's two kinds of deaths. There's the kinds where if your parents or especially if they get a chronic disease or something, and there's time. My wife's dad died about 20 years ago from cancer, and there was a timeline that everybody was given, and this is probably what's going to happen, and it followed that timeline. So everybody had time to be with him and talk to him and process it and go through a lot of those things. But when you just suddenly step off the track and die in a crevasse and you're gone,
Yeah,
it's just so sudden, and there's no time for anyone to prepare
yeah,
or to understand or to make sense of. And you go through all those emotions that you talked about, the blame and the anger and the why not and what
yeah,
if, which are all kind of useless,
yeah,
but you do it
yeah,
because you do.
yeah.
And yeah, it's a remarkable thing to go through that I don't think we're very good at going through.
Well, there's that middle ground. If we could somehow control, this turn of events, you know, having the luxury of time to say goodbye,
Mm,
but without an abundance of time to the point where you become just a burden to those that are closest to you. And so I think there's an important time to hopefully check out before you become really just a burden, and yet the sudden death is obviously really hard on friends and family, because there was no time to say goodbye. It just happens, and especially when people are younger and they have smaller kids and this and that, it's kind of the worst case scenario. I would just hope that when when I'm getting, if I knew I was going to live another 20 years, it'd be one thing that'd be kind of cool, but you just never know. And I have to say, that so far I've had all sorts of orthopedic injuries and this and that. I've been beat up, but overall, I guess I feel fairly healthy. But you'll see how long that goes. But you're right. What's your friend's name who just died? Yeah,
Terry O'Connor, Dr. Terry, everybody called him.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
you probably saw it in the papers
yeah.
because it was a big, it was an avalanche. That's it's kind of like a shark death.
But fairly recently,
And yeah, it was just two weeks
a
ago.
spring
It was 2 weeks
spring
ago.
snowpack.
Yeah,
Was it up
yeah, and
right up there
it
in those mountains right there? Yeah,
it was over in the Big Lost, just south of Bora, which is our highest peak
yeah,
in
yeah,
Idaho, and
yeah,
it was on Donaldson,
yeah,
which strangely enough, it had a big slide, took a couple people out, not, but they both survived just a few years back,
yeah,
and so And like I said, he taught avalanche rescue and safety, and I mean snow science,
Yeah.
as knowledgeable as it gets.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are weird. Like you said, your buddy, the guides,
Yeah. Yeah.
that it takes them out as well,
Yeah.
right? When
Yeah.
you're up,
Yeah.
you're up. But it was cold spring, late bunch of snow. So persistent slab
Yeah. Yeah.
problem that he was totally aware
Yeah.
of.
Yeah.
Down climbing on crampons and just trying to get to a safer spot for their descent. They'd had lunch at the top, hot day,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
triggered something, probably because he was on his feet rather than skis.
Yeah.
Punched through
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean the write up, the assessment. His very good friend, who our main forecaster, went in the next day and just assessed the whole
Yeah.
thing and did a fantastic job writing it up. But like you said, the mountains bite. You bring up an interesting paradox that is kind of interesting to think about. On the one hand, it's horrible for the people around the person when there's no time, when it's really sudden like that. But talk to 100 people who spend their lives like we're talking about. One that you're dealing with some risk, but you're also doing what you are passionate about and love, and so fortunate to be able to do. 100 out of 100 would say, I'd rather be the guy taking a pee and crawl and die in a crevasse than, being a burden or going through some horrible disease, long cancer. It's an interesting one, isn't it? For the surrounding friends and family, it's nicer to have the time, but for the person, for the victim, I'd rather be a victim in the
Yeah.
mountains than,
Yeah. Yeah.
or a victim in the
Yeah.
air than
Yeah.
the big sea. 100%. I mean, there'd just be no.
Yeah.
I don't think there'd be any variance if you asked 100 people.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's an interesting one.
Well, and again, it depends on where someone feels most secure. We actually, feel very secure in the mountains, or in the air.
Sure.
It's what we do, and you take
That's all
that
you have to
away,
play.
and it'd be, you're missing an important part of your life. I don't fly anymore because I don't need to. I'm trying to stay healthy in that sense. I just had my left knee replaced not too long ago, but now my main source of adventure is more on skis or, I just really like to work out on a bike. The body's finally at a point where I'm not trail running like I used to, and so I'm somewhat limited, but I'm fully participating in the things I can do, should do, and it's very satisfying. I'm okay with all that. I don't actually miss paragliding, and I don't miss being in my prime for climbing, because I've been there. Yeah. I'm okay with
Done.
all that.
Yeah.
How old are you now?
52.
52. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
52.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
52.
totally in your prime. Yeah.
I'm just a young
Oh,
buck.
yeah. Yeah. I remember the first time
I don't feel like it every morning
Yeah.
sometimes, but
Yeah. I remember the first time I climbed Denali, it was back in '76. So it was the bicentennial year, and everybody and their grandmother was up on Denali, but we were on the south face and there was no one else around. And there was one guy on our trip and he was 43. And of course, in '76, I was 26 years old. So I was totally in my prime. And I just never forget feeling like, oh man, I sure hope this old guy doesn't, keep us from summiting or whatever, because 43 just sounded so old. And we had a great trip, but I just never forget, now I look back in the age of 43 going, man,
Wow.
there's
Yeah.
nothing
Right.
wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. I spent quite a bit of time ski racing. Yeah, I was out in Vail. I was kind of your neck of the
Yeah.
woods, and there was quite a few of us that were, a few that were on the U.S. team and headed that way, and as fit as fiddles. It just couldn't get any stronger, and our coach was stronger than all of us. He was 43.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
there you go. I mean, especially when it came to endurance, if you got into long running or anything that had any kind of time, because ski racing is pretty short,
Sure.
but any kind of real time, he would just destroy us.
Yeah.
I remember that being so inspiring. I mean, at 20, he was just old,
Yeah.
really old.
Yeah.
God, look at him. He's gray.
Yeah. 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 Well, it's great to have that mutual background as a skier and climber and pilot and everything else because it's I don't know, I look at I live down valley from Aspen. I live in Basalt, so it's down about 18 miles down valley from Aspen. And Aspen's gotten to be so crazy busy and also I go up to town every now and then, but it doesn't do much for me anymore unless I'm skiing. We're surrounded by a pretty cool mountain range, and so are you. And it's like I cannot, it's great to go on vacations and do beach trips and whale watching and any of the things that are exciting to do. But I couldn't imagine living anywhere but in the mountains and or most traveling going to mountain regions. And just the mountain people. One thing that I think we're all aware of is how connected we are wherever we go. It almost doesn't matter where it is. And we might be attracted to a Buddhist culture and lifestyle, all that. But, when it comes right down to it, the mountains have their own sort of spiritual benefits. And you just have to open yourself up to it because it's, even the Dalai Lama would say, hey, you know, all religions are based on the same thing, compassion and impermanence and all the uh, things that are shared, and I think the mountains help to bring that out. Yeah.
Dick, this has been not only wildly entertaining, but quite therapeutic for me. I appreciate you and the life you've lived, and I just can't thank you enough for sharing a tiny slice of it here on the show and with the audience. And thank you, sir. This was a real treat. I appreciate it.
Well, it's been equally fun from this side, and I have to thank you for reaching out because, I've never done a podcast before. Probably, I'm not sure I will ever do another one. But the point is, but it's nice to be able to express, and these are all kind of things that mean a lot to me as I've aged. Just to be able to project out a little bit some of the things that either I've learned or just feel like sharing in some format.
No, you're helping me write my remembrance. We got the ceremony for my buddy here in a couple weeks, and so you've given me some good fodder. But thank you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So, for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription, and it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account, and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.